Hi, welcome to one more episode of The Hard Things About IP. This podcast usually focuses on patents and intellectual property. But as its core, it's really about innovation and the challenges that comes with protecting and growing it. In this episode, we take a different angle. What happens when innovation isn't about technology or legal frameworks, but about people? We are joined by Astrid, CEO and co-founder of Leia Health, to talk about how her company is rethinking parental leave, employee health, and leadership training. Challenges that every organization faces and that directly impact on how innovation can thrive. To start, could you briefly introduce yourself, who you are, and could you tell us about your journey? And also, what inspired you to start this, right? I mean, we are all entrepreneurs, and I'm always curious about this starting point of Leia. I think about something else about Leia, but I would love to hear it from you. And of course,
Depends on if you're a Star Wars fan or not. It also comes from the Latin word for lioness. But I'm also a Star Wars fan, so it's a win-win. So I think my background, I actually started experiencing the problem that we're trying to solve from a customer perspective. In the beginning of my career, I spent over 12 years in the UK, working for a big global enterprise. I'm not going to name any names, but I was there for about 8-9 years. At that time, I didn't have any children of my own. And I started seeing that a lot of people in my team, when they became pregnant or when they decided to start a family, we started losing a lot of really great talent. Usually talent that at this point were quite senior, that we had invested a lot of capital and human capital into. And the feedback I got was that this was not a company at that point that they felt that they could grow in this very kind of transformational life stage, probably the most overwhelming and transformational life stage in your professional life for those of you who don't have kids, so you have something to look forward to. So when I myself became pregnant, I actually had the same journey. I started looking at the policies. I started looking at existing, role models within the company that I felt had a really good way of, optimizing their work, but still being able to have a family. Couldn't find that at that time. And decided actually to leave. Moved back to Sweden, started working for another big enterprise. And when I saw the same patterns there, and I was actually very surprised because I had totally believed the narrative that Sweden is the best in the world when it comes to looking after parents in the workforce or in the society. And to be fair, we are probably one of the best when it comes to lengthy, equal and well-paid parental leave, but all the other structures within that kind of process and transition were equally bad as in many countries in Europe. So I ended up leaving a second workplace where I found that this is, again, not the company I want to grow in. Why I do this, there needs to be another kind of structure around it that allows the people who really want to grow in the company to still manage their new expectations and manage their new circumstances that comes with, growing a family. I went to the startup world, started working and building a startup that worked to digitalize professional networks between Swedes who were new in the country and Swedish companies. So we were co-founded by ESF, so the European Social Fund, and it was all about enabling new people to come into the workforce at a much quicker pace. At that point, I had my third child, and that's when I started actually kind of formulating all these kind of experiences of my own with being a working mother and being a working parent as well, because my husband had a very similar experience. And started looking at it at scale and thinking that this is something that just needs to be addressed. We started off actually there of the legacy of the Leia Health. We started off just with postpartum health. So we identified that today in the majority of the world, but specifically in Sweden, almost 80% of women go undiagnosed in postpartum issues such as postpartum depression or birth injuries. So we saw that there was no digitalization whatsoever in this space. There's a lot that could be done. So we started building different screening models for postpartum depression and birth injuries. And our goal was to help identify these women at a much earlier stage, charge them into the healthcare system, and at the same time educate and enable them to have a much healthier recovery. Fairly quickly into that, we started, looking at it from a more B2B aspect. I think that's, even though you have a B2C company that wants to add value to the end user, I think using corporates as an accelerator and a change agent to reach scale is so important. And, if you want to create real change, you need to involve all stakeholders. It can't just be the end user who needs the change. You need to kind of enable that kind of traction of change from all stakeholders. And I think as all health companies, we thought that the way in was through the benefits route. We saw fairly quickly that benefit is a very saturated market. It's a very volatile market in the sense that the second the market goes down, and we've all experienced that in the last couple of years, employee wellness is the first thing that goes. It is just like that budget is gone, and then the employees are gone, right? So we started looking at from another angle, and because we kept hearing that employee wellness, employee health, parental health is always a nice to have. It's not a need to have. And when we started looking at like what existing processes that are mandatory and legal do they actually have that makes what we're offering something more of a need to have. And that's how we kind of identify the parental leave as a kind of way into the product. So instead of going down the benefit routes, we started looking at how can we actually optimize this incredibly repetitive and core function within HR that is, legally applied to do. It's probably the most universal process. People will keep having kids. Birth rate has gone down, but they will keep having kids. So this is such a necessary process to optimize. And when we started looking at it, we saw that we were actually quite shocked and how we'd almost identified this hidden problem and hidden cost that was such a massive, it just affected so many people. Because if you look at it, 80% of the global workforce are parents or will become parents at one point, making this transition such an integral part of their employee journey. However, today, parental leave is seen very much as a logistical kind of challenge. It's just like reporting when they're coming, reporting when they're going, reporting if they're having a cover, how much they'll get paid. And there is no process that actually enables managers to give employees a good experience through this very transformational stage. And there's no support structure for parents in the workforce. So that's when we decided to kind of throw all the old things out and start building the infrastructure for parents in the workforce. And where we could actually start with parental leave because it's such an integrated part already of HR, and make sure how we can change it from a logistical challenge to a strategic advantage. And from a cost perspective, just to finish off on the why, this is also a massive hidden cost because today almost 40% of employees actually change employer after parental leave, and almost 30% go on sick leave at some point, coming back, mostly women. And when you look at just that continuous parental journey, when it comes to employee burnout, that's represented about 65% of parents. So we saw that their whole kind of parental journey, that longevity within a company was non-existing. And then there was no support structures that actually enabled companies to attract and retain parents in the workforce, which is by far the largest cohort. And that's why we're here.
So interesting. I mean, really, and maybe your own view on it. Why do you think that many changes job after a parental leave?
I mean, I've changed twice, so I can speak for myself, but I can also speak for many of our users. And we're just in the end stage of finalizing the first and biggest national report on parental leave, where we have interviewed HR leaders from 25 of the biggest companies and over 100 employees. And the data there kind of is aligned with my own experience, that you're going through this incredibly overwhelming and life-changing life stage in your career. And at that point, you just want to kind of be acknowledged by your employer that this is an overwhelming life stage. And we understand that it's something that most people go through, and we are going to give you the support structures and the tools you need to come out of this in the best possible way, because we value you. We value you as a human and as an employee. And that human journey is non-existent. Well, it's not non-existent, but it's incredibly inconsistent, because if you have a manager that's a parent themselves or have gone on parental leave, then you have a much higher chance of getting a good experience. However, if you have a manager that's quite young, never had kids, or very long time ago, or they never take parental leave themselves, they could have the best intention, but they're never going to be able to meet your needs, because it's such a personalized experience. So that's why this area is such a perfect use case for digitalization and AI, because you need to streamline it to feel comfortable that it will be a consistent process, that every employee in your workforce will have the same optimal experience. But you also really need to personalize it, because where one person wants to, I don't even want to be contacted while I'm away, I feel like you're really kind of pushing it if you even contact me. Whereas other people feel incredibly isolated if they're not included in, after works or Christmas parties and such. And I think from my point of view, one of the biggest barriers for a good experience, and one of the reasons I left also, is that it's never something that's measured. So you're never asked, how was your experience? How was your support? Did the manager give you that kind of structure? Did you even have any reboarding? Did you have any offboarding? Talking about what it would look like when you're coming back. So you just felt that it was very much out of sight, out of mind. And then you just constantly felt that I'm really having a hard time managing these new circumstances, and I'm not going to get the support that I need from this employer. So I'm going to have to start look elsewhere. And I mean, we see that a lot, because the highest churn are usually within, finance, legal, all these kind of management consultants, where they have that really kind of hard kind of work environment sometimes. But then, so I think it's just like what's missing is the human factor of just acknowledging what a big thing this is, and just building a structure around it that actually supports that.
And I mean, somehow you touched upon it, I think, multiple times, right? You talk about the employees, you talk about the organizational processes, right? They're two different bubbles. And obviously you seem to address them both in your company. What I'm curious about to hear is how do you balance these? Because they are important, both of them, right? But how do you balance these two sides when you're building now the solution?
I think that's a really good question. And I think that's always one of the hardest thing to look at when you're building a company, right? Do you go broad or do you go super niche? And I mean, we started from a health perspective, and we saw the massive change that we could do with the product that we were building. Just as an example, the official number of women getting diagnosed for postpartum depression is between 10 and 13%. But the women going through our product, we've identified about 40% of being at risk of postpartum depression, with a 60% success rate in those actually leading to early diagnosis and treatment. So we know that we can really optimize their health, work preventively, and really decrease the sick leave. And when you look at this, and that's, I think, when it comes to building holistic products, because if you look at it, it's just because a normal way of building companies is you start with one pain point, and then you do that really well, and then you own that, and then you broaden, But I think when it comes to postpartum, and when it comes to this life stage of, entering parenthood, the key problem is that it is never one thing. It is the lack of sleep, it's the flexibility, it's the VAB, it's all these different things happening at the same time. it's the uncertainty of coming back knowing it's the same role. It's, the culture, the stigma around it, that, you should just be able to balance it. And if you can't, then you're not succeeding in, being a working parent. Because I think, so when we looked at it, we were like, we can't just build the process. We need to build the infrastructure. And for the infrastructure, you need like the health angle and the process angle and the experience. Those are so integral that we felt you couldn't have one with the other. And it also obviously creates that kind of moat, like a product moat also from a data perspective, because when we're looking at it, like from a competitive angle, it would obviously, look at being one of the big HR systems who currently don't have this process. They only have reporting. But the data that we're building now, we have AI agents, both to optimize the health, but also to build the optimal parental leave process and plan for each employee and action lists for each manager. That data allows us, like the mix between the health and the data and the leave planning is so integral as well, because if you had health issues, and that affects your leave and that affects your productivity and engagement. So it's so incredibly integral. So we decided to really kind of bundle it into like parental management, and start there to create that data moat, but also to create a solution that actually attacks those kind of core angles at the same time.
I mean, speaking about data, right? Obviously, that seems to be an important role in your product. When I built my business, I'm working with two types of data sets. One, the public data, and then one, my client's data, which is by nature very sensitive. But in your perspective, somehow the data you are building and navigating through is about mental health, right? How do you do about that? I mean, GDPR, sure, but now, can you just elaborate on that?
The data that we collect, so I'm not going to go on a big rant about women's health and the big gender gap when it comes to data, but that's a whole nother show. But one of the biggest problems when you're building products initially targeting women is that there is no public data. There has been no data collected. So you always have to start from scratch, and you have to build your own data sets. And when we started, we have one of the largest data sets in the world now, I would think, for postpartum data. We started looking at like, what are the different aspects? So it's collecting data on mental health, on physical health, on sleep health, and looking at kind of building that optimal journey from there. And obviously, when it comes to managing sensitive data, we're, obviously incredibly strict in following any compliance, if it's like HIPAA, SOX, ISO, to ensure that you have all those regulations in place. We also, for AI agents, would never share any health, any health data, any sensitive data to that. It all kind of works in combination. And same thing from an employer perspective. The data that we have on their employees' health and the data we have on their employees' experience, we never share that with any employer as well. So what we do is, from a data reporting point of view, we share aggregated and anonymized end reports where we look at, these are the areas that you need to work with. These are your opportunities for growth. How many activated the problem, how many used it, how many had the offboarding meeting, how did it lower the workload, how did it increase the understanding of the policy. So we have all these different outcomes that we report on, but we never share any data whatsoever. And that's an incredibly important. And side note, I don't know if you've read the news and following the whole circus around one of the world's biggest pregnancy tracker app, Flow, but they just got fined, I can't remember, it was $56 or $65 million for sharing sensitive health data from their users. So I think it was Facebook. So when it comes to having that data compliance and that data security, it's obviously incredibly important from a trust issue, both from a user and employer, but obviously, from a compliance point of view. So that's very important, and should be very important for anyone, managing sensitive data. But we don't take in external data. It's all our own data. We're collecting it. We're building, proprietary prompt triggers on it. We're building now proprietary models when it comes to defining, potentially preemptive postpartum depression, looking at, early signs of postpartum issues, physical issues. We're also going to build proprietary models when it comes to, early detection of churn, early detection of lack of productivity, so we can start to work even more preventively when it comes to, engaging and retaining employees. And that's all on our own data, because this is usually not data that is collected. And that's one of the problems, but it also creates a better solution and a better moat, because there was no other data to train models on if anyone would copy,
Yeah. And what about the hardest part about turning an innovative ideas, obviously you had, right, into a sustainable business? You touched upon it earlier when you tried to describe it, okay. But tell me.
I think it's like it's a mindset thing, right? You have to be really open to failing and failing fast, and you have to understand like where you are in your journey. So we've been around for a couple of years, but we're still, fairly early on in the revenue kind of, and we started direct to consumer. We had a very big partnership with insurance companies to look at it from an insurance path. And then we tested the direct B2B as well from a parental leave solution. And at the end of those, we're like, okay, we have to make one bet. We can't do it all, right? So you have to be really good at just making those bets and following through, but then learning really quickly. And also being able to really, reorganize and restructure. We talked about a little bit before, like how do you structure a sales team if you're like between SME and enterprise? And you have to be really quick at reading those signals, right? Of what's really going to fly and where do we see those signals and where do we put our bets on when it comes to scaling and when it comes to building the organization, because it can go so quickly. You started building an organization and 6 months later half of those are obsolete because you're going another direction, right? So I think that's a really important one. And I think you just have to be incredibly comfortable with uncertainty and really drive on that, because that's not for everyone. You have an incredibly high part of uncertainty, especially if you're building something that doesn't exist. We were the first postpartum health tracker. We're the first one doing what we're doing in this way. And with that comes a lot of education, right? Long sales cycles, because you're talking to companies like, no, we don't have a problem. And then you go like, but are you measuring this? Are you tracking the data? Do you know your retention numbers post leave? Do you know engagement or disengagement? Do you know these things? No, we don't. And then they start tracking it, and then they come back and they're like, shit, this is a big problem. We didn't know because we've never tracked it. And now that takes time, right? So it's a bit of that. The risks are higher, but the rewards can also be very high. So just having that mindset of testing it and believing in it, I think goes a really long way, and being fast and agile.
Good. Sounds good. Which takes me then obviously to the question of, what are the biggest hurdles, right? When you're trying convincing organizations, companies, to adopt something new in such a sensitive area.
Where do I start? No, I'm just kidding. But no, there's not. Do you know what the weirdest thing is? Like the biggest hurdle sometimes is the fact that they don't want to say no, because no one wants to say, no, I don't think this is important. No, I don't think that we should have, equal, support in senior levels. I don't think it's important with like these different things. Everyone obviously thinks it's important, but they want to take their time and they want to, see if they can solve it themselves. And then they come back and they realize that they can't, because some aspects, I think, of like IP, or there's some aspects that are so people just know that I won't be able to do this. It's too complex. We won't be able to do it ourselves. We have to buy it in, right? Whereas when it comes to the human factor, you always have a feeling of like, no, we can. when we start to see like how we build the data structure around it and how we can build our existing data set to like fast track their advancement and fast track their personalization and their process, that's, usually where they, turn around. And I would say culture is also a massive, can be a massive barrier. And sometimes in Sweden, we think that we're really good at it. So we don't think it shouldn't be a prioritization. We give them money, we give them leave. What else do they want, But when they start tracking the data, they see that it's an even costlier, problem for Swedes, because you still have the same churn. But then you've just paid a full year of parental pay, and then you have to re-recruit that same person. Whereas, in the UK or other companies, you have them, you pay 3 months, and then you re-recruit. So it's about changing the narrative, I think, about looking at it from it's always been like this, what's the problem, to actually started looking at the data and transforming the data into kind of monetary terms. Because I don't think once you quantify the problem, that's the only way that companies can prioritize it. If you start to, help them and educate them and show them this is what it's costing you by not prioritizing this problem, long term and short term, then it becomes a very different conversation. And I think similar to, IP, it's like a long-term investment, right? If you invest in these structures, it's going to be a very kind of good ROI from a branding perspective, but also from a cost perspective. And it's just building that case, almost removing the whole we want to do good and we want to create value and impact and diverse, and just making it into a cost. You have this, repetitive process. You have to do it. You're legally required to do it. If you're doing it badly, we'll do it better, and it will save you money, So it's like restructuring the conversation, I think.
I love it. I love it. Okay, if you look at now from an IP perspective, where we obviously come from, we often talk about, how intangible assets can shape company value, right? I mean, it can be, the secret sauce, in your code, or the secret algorithm in your product, right? Looking a little bit now at you, right, as a founder, CEO, and, your company, do you see employee health and structured parental process as a similar kind of intangible assets? Because it is data, right, that you are collecting and then the companies can use. Do you think that will make companies stronger and more attractive because then they will know, right? How do you see it, this?
100%. And I think it's like we're moving into a very fast-paced world with key talents is becoming incredibly competitive. We're just looking at the different salaries and sign-on bonuses and structures that these big AI companies are having. It's astronomical, because they know that it's all in the employees, right? And I think when you're starting looking at how do we build, a structure around, you need to truly understand that and retain that. You need to have that data, but you need to measure the right things. And sometimes I compare when it comes to stress, trying to work preventively with different stress. A couple of years ago, that wasn't a thing. And people were just like, if they can't hack it, they're weak. And we shouldn't have them as employees anyway. And it's kind of the same thing in this area. It's like, if they're struggling, if they can't balance the family and they can't balance, working, then we don't want them anyway. And then it's like, yeah, but it's 80% of the global workforce, right? So you're going to have to start putting these efforts in. You're going to have to start measuring the right thing and building a company that allows you to actually retain and understand and optimize for this talent. Otherwise, you're going to be in a very difficult situation when it comes to from a talent perspective. So I think definitely it's going to be really interesting. And I think there's going to be much more and more really data-driven insights. Is what does the employee want? There's already a lot of these, actually pay is not usually the highest when it comes to what employees want. It is like, I want to have the balance, right? I want to be able to see my kids, and I want to be able to like go on for that run and work with that I do and work really focused and have that team at, and we're going to move away from what we think they want and be much more data driven in like, what do they want and how do we build that culture and how do we build that structure and that infrastructure for employees to really have that longevity. And I think that's the future, and that's kind of the future that we want to be part of building.
Which now takes me obviously to a question in terms of you're building this data. Let's consider it as trade secret in your company, because you're building a lot of know-how. It becomes your secret sauce. Would that mean that in a future, some years from today, you would be able actually to prevent this type of risk for companies? I mean, would you have the formula to tell them if you do X, Y, Z, this shouldn't happen, or if you do M&A, then you won't have this, churn on your employee, or how
yeah,
do
that's
you
the
see
plan.
it?
I mean, and that's very in the short future. We're already starting to looking into buying, building these predictive models, and the more data we have and the more, outcome data we have, the better they are. So it's all about building that kind of foreseeable structure, and not leaving a lot of these incredibly integral processes to chance, which is what's happening now. So that's definitely kind of the path we're on. And since we are like one of the first one in this segment, the more data and the quicker we can build this predictive model, obviously the bigger the moat. But it's really interesting because when we started doing this, we started looking into, okay, how can like IP from that channel, okay, you can only trademark or the model that you train your data on, but then how can you ever prove that someone has, replicated that? So, right. So it's a bit of a jungle when it comes to, how to really, you have the moat because you can, build the predictive models because you have the data. But then it's not like how to duplicate it, how to, there's going to be copycats. There's always copycats in the beginning of a journey, right? But
definitely. And I think you can really see it on the latest product that, Apple released on their Apple Watch, right? That it took them literally 1.5 years to release that feature, to do blood pressure, predictions if you have high blood pressure, right? So it's like a statistical data that they collect from the body, right? Or from the user. And they had actually to wait to release it because they weren't really ready. So you can really see, so most probably I assume now that their secret sauce there is the data that they have collected over so many years, obviously, but also to be sure that it's accurate, right? It requires some type of testing. And that is for me an IP, definitely. And the question is, of course, you as a CEO, how you want to handle it. But I assume you have locked it into a very secret box that not many people in your company can access. Because in the end of the day, it's your bread and butter, I assume.
100%, 100%. And I think that's like, when it comes to, because especially now with the advancement of AI and how quickly this data is being collected, just looking at, previous years, we're just looking like when we started our health product, the data was all kind of manually inserted by the user. Prompted. And now when we have AI agents, they just sit there like breastfeeding at 4 a.m., like, what's happening? There's so much data. So just, what could have taken, a couple of years to collect enough big enough and high quality enough data set to start building these predictive models now can be done in months, right? So I think everyone's just like learning by doing right now, but you have to do it in a very structured way to ensure the outcome and to ensure the predictability is correct and all these different things. But the potential is amazing, and you really have to be very strict on that secret sauce and that kind of proprietary techniques and algorithms, because it's going to be what makes the biggest difference in the long run.
Definitely. And I think also now when you see a lot of people are wearing, these smart devices, it can be everything from a watch to a small device that measures literally most of the things on your body, right? And I think that takes me literally to the next questions, which you touched upon, right? I mean, you use a lot of data-driven insights, right? But Where do you see AI fit that for the future of the employee health solutions? I mean, will you see another type of Leia company doing something else, or do you see more companies coming into this field?
I think what's a positive signal and positive sign when you're kind of building a new segment, right, is that more people are coming into that segment and usually taking different approaches. So we see products, going quite deep into their health, not so much postpartum health anymore, but or at this point, but we also see companies that just work with like parental leave reporting and payout and compliance, and then we see companies that only do like coaching, like going back to work, reboarding coaching, like the work-life transition coaching. So what's really exciting about that the more company that comes in, the more it kind of validates as a segment and as a, area ready for growth and ready for innovation. And then it's just up to each company, like who has the execution, right? Who has the makes the right decisions and have that piece of luck and lands that big customer to accelerate. And I think we see that in a lot of different segments. We saw it previously with all these like legal AI companies. There were so many. I think there were like 80 6 months ago, and now they're 15. So it needs to be an influx of new innovations to really validate that this is an area ripe for innovation. And then it's just down to execution to see kind of who lives the longest.
and Astrid, looking at you now, I mean, 3 children, CEO, founder. If you could design an AI tool that would make your work easier, and of course private life simultaneously, what would it do?
Something that just added maybe 6 hours to the day.
Efficiency.
No, but I love the whole kind of time boxing. I think time boxing is a really useful tool. I'm quite manual in my time boxing now, where I'm putting the clock on, like I'm going to work on this, to solve this problem for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to move on, and then I come back. So I think that kind of time boxing is super interesting, but I think it could be much more personalized, because you don't know, like some people can only work in 20-minute spurts, and then they have to change topics, and some people just cannot do context switching whatsoever. They have to work on one thing, and I think like building some kind of time efficiency, time boxing tool that is much more attuned to each personal kind of DNA and how you work and how your brain works would be really interesting. Because I think if you work in digitalization, I've always worked in digitalization, and if you have that, you are some kind of efficiency nut, right? You're always driven by this, like, how can I get to A to B smarter, faster, and better? So I would like to have an AI tool that would like optimize my output, so I don't have to work long hours.
No, but fair enough. No, and I think you're on it, right? It's part of the problem. I mean, obviously an AI can't create 6 hours for you, but it can help you to optimize the day most, so you feel that you gain 6 hours, right?
Yeah. It's like enable a structure for me to get 12 hours of work into 6 hours, Build me that.
I love it.
I'll buy it.
Ping me when you have found it, because I'm also curious that I would love to use it.
Definitely.
Okay, going a little bit more now into you as an entrepreneur, right? And I think we both heard when we started our businesses, pay it forward is super important, because whatever you have learned, the other person shouldn't do the same mistakes. But what advice would you give to other founders trying to bring a new people-focused innovation to market?
Joe, ask for help. Listen. It's a really interesting balance, right? Because a lot of people come in and they have this perception and this hypothesis of this problem, and then they have this very clear idea of what they're going to build, and then they just start building that, and they stop speaking to the actual potential buyers or the end consumer, And you have to, I mean, our whole kind of flow into more parental leave from the help that came from talking to so many users and them just saying, yeah, I'm starting to feel okay, but I'm gonna change. I'm gonna quit my job. I'm gonna like everyone started saying that I'm gonna quit my job. I'm gonna quit my job in the user interviews, and we're like, are they really so many really quit their jobs? And so I think like continuously stay curious and just ask questions. And I think also I have this 100% myself. Sometimes you can get so into your product, right? So you just want to sell it. You just want to tell the world about your product, and you stop asking questions, and you're just like output, and you just start, stop asking the right questions. And I think that was actually still, many years on as an entrepreneur, one of my biggest reflections now when we did this Leia report, so the national report on the state of parental leave in Sweden, talking to the biggest companies and hundreds of employees. And during all those interviews with these really senior HR people and leaders, I didn't mention Leia once. It is just, we did it with women in tech and unconventional ventures. It was just the report. It was not a sales effort. And I just asked them questions. And after every single interview, they were like, we should really have a product like yours, because I'm hearing now when I'm talking about it, we're really bad at tracking this, or like la la la. And I hadn't said a word about my product, right? I just asked them questions and came to that realization themselves. So even though you want to shout your solution out from the rooftops, like never stop being curious, continue talking to customers continuously, and always ask for help. And I think like I've asked so many people for help in terms of, can you look at my pitch deck when I started, or just cold calling random people I admired and like, can I take you out for a coffee? I would love to hear how you got from A to B. I've done that to so many people. Like one of the big, we're doing partnerships with Clue, which is one of the biggest menstrual trackers in the world. And that just came from me going up to them at a conference and like, love what you're doing with Clue. Like, how can we have a chat? And so always be open up to, having those questions, asking, learning. I think that's so important. But at the end of the day, you and the team, you know your product best, right? So I think as early days, it's also really easy to be a bit like wined and dined by really smart people, and they're like, you should go B2B and you need to do this. And investors especially, like, this is what investors want to see, so we'll build that, instead of just like, this is what needs to be built and we'll build that, and then we'll show the value, and then the investors will come. So it's having that balance, right, of being open, curious, but then believing in your vision. And I would say long answer.
No, but super good. And I think somehow you can really boil it down to like, stay curious and be humble, right? And always, and I think this is what you're trying to say somehow with a balance. And then of course, the last but not least, stay focused on what you're doing.
100%.
Always. Yeah.
Very good summary of that long-winded answer.
It's easy. I'm just listening in, right? You are talking so good. You mentioned that you wanted 6 extra hours, but I have to ask you, I assume you still have some time for your own, quality time. Is there a book, film, or song that has inspired the way you think about innovation or leadership?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can't say one specific film, like, not Jerry Maguire, Aaron Brockovich, I was going to say. But I've always been very inspired by people who just like, they had this incredibly strong belief in what was right and what was wrong. And they didn't let anyone stand in their way. And they just did it. And I think I'm very inspired by people with just that kind of grit and can-do attitude. And I really do believe that those are the kind of people and that kind of mentality that creates, global change. So I'm taking Erin Brockovich as an example, but those kind of films and that kind of storytelling where it's like, no one's going to do this, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to solve this problem. How hard can it be? I think that's incredibly inspiring. And I love that mentality.
Astrid, this has been a fantastic conversation. We could most probably continue forever, but then we have to create parts out of it. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience on your innovation journey. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast. That it's for today's episode of The Hard Things About IP. If you have enjoyed this discussion, be sure to subscribe to more conversations with IP and innovative professionals. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.